Hey kids, welcome back. In this episode of Power Apps and Coffee, we're going to return to Make It Pretty Monday, and we're going to visit an old friend, the pop-up menu. Let's go. So the other day, I was on the web and I was kind of browsing through different articles, and I saw someone mention in a design article about building an Apple-like menu bar and having the nice fades and rounded corners and the things that are pretty. And I thought to myself, well, I don't need that, but I bet I could build that. And that happens from time to time. I have to admit, as a developer, I will just build some things that I don't necessarily need, but they look like a fun, interesting challenge. And that's what I have for you today. I'm going to build a pop-up menu. Now, I know we all have that. We all use that. But I wanted to add a little flair to that, just to see if I could. So to give you an idea of what we're going to build today, I want to show it to you in action first, and then we'll go through how to put it together. So as you see, we have an app here, and much like the Who, we're going mobile. Why? Because this whole concept really works best when you are limited for space, and no place is there less space than on our mobile interface. Every line is at a premium. So I built a simple app, and we see here, it's just a gallery header, a little timer button, but that's just kind of there functionally, and a menu bar. And the idea was, how do I get a navigation bar in here with the least impact and most flair? So I thought about that Apple look and feel and decided, well, let's see what I can do. I want it to pop in, and I've done it before. You just do rectangle overlays and, kind of show and hide things. But again, we're on Make It Pretty Monday, so we want to add almost an overkill level of flair. So let me show you what we're going to do. So I have our hamburger menu in the upper left-hand corner, and the idea was, let's trigger the navigation menu from there. So we click, and falling in from the top, we have our navigation elements. We see here, in this case, just 3 icons. We click, and it goes back and forth. That's what we're going to build today. Now, the idea behind it, the constraints that I put in, if you look, was I need it reusable and I need it somewhat dynamic. In other words, I don't want to fix the icons. I want them sent in with some level of control. So reusable, okay, we're going to build a component. And then being able to pass things in, well, we're going to send things in with some form of collection or record, table. And we'll take a look at how that's going to be built. All right, so we have this one built. We're going to go ahead and drop a new one here. But the first thing we're going to do is sort of put together the menu itself, and that's going to be a component. Now, if you watch the previous Make It Pretty Monday, you know that we played with SVGs, and I like them now because they're lightweight, they're code. You don't have to go to Photoshop and build in your image, because, well, that's going to add weight to your Power App, especially if you get some of the larger images. I already have a header image. I don't need anything more. So I went to our friends here at W3 Schools. Again, thank you, Shane, for pointing this one out. And if you see down here, well, you have a rectangle. Good. We know we're going to need that. But we also have this linear SVG and a drop shadow. Now, the linear SVG, is where you're going to get your gradient fade. And that's kind of the look and feel we're going for today, is because we want a bit of texture and depth to it. And the drop shadow, of course, since we're going to be floating in, I just want to give it a little bit of flair and let it have a bit of a shadow as it came in. So let's go ahead to our Triad editor, and you can see what it is we're going to build. Now, I'll go through what we have, kind of give you an idea what is here. And again, I'm not an SVG expert. I blatantly stole almost all of this from the tutorials. I just fit it to what I needed it to. So as we see here, our SVG definition, first thing we're going to have is 2 rectangles. And the way they stack, the first thing is our shadow rectangle, but we'll go backwards for this. Okay, we have a base rectangle of 300 width, 50 height, with radius in the corners of X and Y of 20 pixels. Now we are filling it with the gradient, and that is defined here in our defs. So you see we're doing grad 2, that's the ID, and really This is the way it's defined. Feel free to look it up and go in depth about this, but essentially we have a gradient from our slightly above mid-gray to pure white. And you can see that done here where we have a mid-gray to a pure white. Just enough to give it a bit of a shadow to make that appearance that it's somewhat rounded. Again, I'm not reinventing the wheel, I just wanted a little bit extra to it. Now below that, as you could see here, is this semi-translucent shadow. And now that is what this filter is. And again, you're going to take it from the drop shadows. But essentially it's the same rectangle. And we just have a filter of this URL F1, and there's your F1. The most notable things here, to be totally honest with you, is this DX and DY, and that is the position of the shadow. For example, if we wanted to make that 10, you're going to see it offset over to the right. Alright, but we want it straight down because we're not doing anything overly picky, and that gives us our button. Sweet. So let's put it into use. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Now I've already sort of pre-formatted. I'll admit the examples here use double quotes. I've already cleansed it for the single text so we can put it in Power Apps. But let's go ahead and build ourselves a component. Now we already have the other one from the other example. We're going to build a new one. We'll call it that. And now the first thing we want is to size it. Now we had 300 by 50. We're going to do 300 by 55 because our drop shadow hangs 5 pixels low. Now, first thing we want to do is take care of the fill. Because we have the transparent piece and because we have round corners, we want to make sure that none of the white background shows. So just to be thorough, we're going to mark the fill of our component as transparent. And the first thing we want to do is drop an image. It's full width, and in our image, now the SVG, as we know, we do have that, and we can paste that in, but it's incorrect to start because what we need is, and I have this off screen because I never remember this, is this particular text is not correct. We have to and suffix it with this data image text and encoding our URL. Tick, tick. Do a quick look. The SVG to SVG tag is what we pasted in. We just added this extra bit in to define what it is in our image, and boom, we have it. So at its face, we have it built. Now, what from there? We need to add things to it, and of course, adding is a gallery. So the first thing we're going to need to do is prepare for our data. And for that, we're going to need 2 properties on this. Now the first one is a throwaway one. So we're going to go ahead and build temp screen, and it's going to be a property type input and of type screen. And we're not going to actually use this externally, but we need it, and I'll show you why. So we create that, and now we need to create our data. So we're going to do navigation elements, input type table. And now this is going to be the elements we're going to pass in to feed our navigation bar. Again, we don't necessarily know what this component is going to be used for, and the menu may change. Either way, I like to keep my options somewhat fluid and configure it outside of the app. So we're going to send it in as a table. Now we don't have a collection, fine, but tables work just fine. We need to go to our component, and if we look at our navigation elements, we see a table has been defined. And for those who haven't done this yet, this right here it serves 2 purposes. One, it is sample data, so it has to be legitimate, but it also defines the template for which you're going to pass in information to this particular table. And so we need to set it to something usable. Now, the 2 things we're going to need here are, for a navigation bar, is the icon, easy, and the screen it goes to. So if you look, if we went to icon, now we need a default, so we'll just send it to home. But we also need a screen. And this is where that temp screen comes in, because if we did blank, we've not defined it, and that's inappropriate. So what we do is we set up a temp screen. Whoops. Com menu demo dot temp screen. And close your record. So this gives us our template, but it also gives us something to use from within. So again, leaving this as blank, what the problem would be is now we have to put a function on that, which is going to be a navigate, and that navigate needs a screen. So blank wouldn't have worked. So the use of our temp property gives us our template. It's like we're never going to use it, but at least gives us that placeholder. All right, from here, we have our image, we have our definition. Now we need our gallery. So we are going to go to layout, and we're going to do a horizontal gallery. And our items are going to be menu demo dot navigation elements. Okay, easy enough. Now we want this full width because our image goes full width, so we're going to stretch that out, but we don't want to just stretch it. So what we're going to do is we're going to set it to the width of our component. Now we are also going to set, let's go ahead and be in here. Let's go to our gallery, call it items. Now we want to make sure that this is centered, because we want to make sure, depending on how many images we're going to, icons we're going to send in, we want to make sure it's centered. To do our centering, we want to go ahead and do our com menu demo dot width minus our gallery width and divide that by 2. So that gives us our way of centering the object. Now next, we need to go to our gallery, and our template size is not that. Now what we want to do here is define our template size such where it reacts to the number of items. So what we want to do is take our components width, and we want to divide it by the number of elements in our particular gallery here. So divided by rows, items, all items, and that makes sure our template width will adjust accordingly. Now we're a little stretched here, so we want to make sure our template padding is set to 0. So that gives us all of our spacing. So the next thing we need an icon. So we're just going to grab the first one because we don't really care. And we're going to set this icon, first thing, we're going to do 35, height 50, and that gets us centered. Now the width we want here, we want to be the template width. Alright, so as that shrinks and grows, it'll be automatically sized, but it will by default let us center things. And finally we want the icon to be this item dot icon, which is home. And last, we have our on select, which is going to be simply navigate to this item dot screen. So we have our icons in place. It's now going to feed dynamically based upon how we use it, and we have our component built. All right, so let's see how we put this in practice. So the first thing I want to go over is some general housekeeping stuff that's going to be in our app on start. And this sort of sets the stage for us in terms of getting things, some general global things, which have been done for the other demo, but are going to be reused every which way. So we see here, first and foremost, we have a menu direction. And that's going to tell us, is the menu going up or down on its next action? We have a start menu equals false, and this is going to be used to trigger the timer. So the timer's triggered upon on start menu, or var start menu. And then we have our positions for up and for down. So it has to go somewhere, and therefore these are the default positions at their end points. So we're going to have an X position of 9 and -60, whether we're down or whether we're up. Finally, we have our data. And what we see here is we're building the table. Let's say our navigation elements is a table. The component takes tables, not collections. And so we've gone ahead and built this up right now. Now, how you create this in production is entirely up to you, of course, but this gives us some sample data. And then finally, some defaults. So the position starts up, and then our start menu for the timer is set to false. And that gives us our initialization. Now, if we go here, we want to add our component to the screen. We go to custom, we have our hover menu. We want to go ahead and put that here. We're going to need an icon. We're going to need a hamburger. All right, let's get that something visible. I'll hide you there. Okay. So first and foremost, we're going to get our component set up. So we do not want the defaults. So what we want is our tab drop down elements table. And as you can see, so our sizing is slightly off. We could fix that, but you do see that the icons are automatically populated and spaced based upon what we did. So by having the template size do its magic based upon the number of items and having them centered based upon the template width, we have our icons evenly spaced. Now before this does anything, obviously animation is done via a timer. So let's go ahead and get that put in, and we can get started. So we're just going to drop one down here, and let's go through some of it now. We're not doing 10 seconds. We want it pretty quick. We're going to do this at half a second. Now we're going to start it. This is our var start menu. So that was what we saw in onStart. It's a simple Boolean. When it turns true, the timer starts. And now we have to go for the action, which for us is on timer end. And really, the value of the timer is what's going to move the menu, and we'll see that momentarily. So what we need to do is handle what happens when it ends. It gives us some sort of consistent state. And what that will be, I'm going to just go ahead and paste this in, is what we see here. So we have our start menu equals false, turn the timer off. We have our menu direction. What we want is if that particular direction is either going up or going down. Remember, we've completed the timer. We want to set our menu position to either its final up or final down position. And menu position, as we're going to see in the component, is what dictates the axis position for our menu. And then finally, we trigger the menu direction to go to the opposite. So the next click will take it in the other direction. But that's our timer. We want to go ahead and get this started. So our hamburger menu is what's going to trigger it. And so this is where we want the timer value of var start timer set and changed. And we're going to go here, and the first thing we're going to do is reset that. Timer start menu. And then we are going to set var start menu to true. So we're going to reset it, make sure everything goes back to its defaults, and then we are going to trigger it starting. Okay, so we've got our trigger, we've got our timer. Now let's go ahead and look at our component. So the main anything here is the Y axis. We look here. What we have is, first things first, is if it's var start menu. So if it's moving, we want it to have a variety of position. If it's not moving, we want it to be at var menu position. So if it's moving, we'll show the dynamic. If not, we want it at its fixed place. This way, when we reset the timer, we don't see a bit of a hiccup in our particular menu. But what it's going to do is, if it is moving, so if our direction is true, we're going to move it to the position down plus 100 times a value based on the value of the timer. So we see here the timer's value, which counts up from 0 to, this case, 500, minus the duration. So it's that fraction of the duration divided by the duration. So we have a percentage, essentially, is what we're doing here. And the same is true for the opposite. So we're doing sum our position up, in this case, plus that position times that same fraction of the timer. So we do a quick reset here, do a run on start, hit our button, and boom, we have our menu. It comes and goes. So that's really it. Now, of course, we could see here, we can go home and it brings us here. This icon set was slightly lower. We go back here and our menu can come and go. Now you could have your on visible, rehide that, that's entirely up to you, but that does give us our example of how to build a pop-in menu with a little bit of flair. I hope that's useful. You may or may not find a use for it. I thought it was cool, and again, it was just a challenge that I needed to put together. So I appreciate you listening. Until next time, have a good one.